Michelle, good afternoon again, everybody. Just to welcome you to another of the Continuous Cover Forestry Group's webinars. I'm Bill Mason. I'm pleased to be the chair of the Continuous Cover Forestry Group. And it's my pleasure today to welcome a colleague from Slovenia, Professor Jurij Diaci from the University of Ljubljana. Jurij's a very eminent silvicultural researcher who's worked for many years on the forests of Central Southern Europe. Tremendous number of publications to his name, and a really interesting speaker and presenter. And we're really honored to have Jurij with us today to talk on the subject of freestyle silviculture in Slovenia. I should add that Jurij will talk for about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll have a period of time for questions. So I look forward to this presentation very much. Jurij, the floor is yours.
So hope you can hear me well.
Yep, all well.
And that you see the slide.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Bill, for presentation and also for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really pleasure for me to speak in front of an audience interested in forest and especially ecological forestry, and to be able to speak about a topic that is really close to me, the freestyle silviculture. Europe has a long tradition of transforming nature and also high population density. Nevertheless, I believe the forests are in a relatively good condition compared to other continents, or the processes are good. We are having more and more forests, and also we have relatively good governance. We have kind of history of sustainable use of forest resources, and there is also increasing international cooperation, which is really a good thing. However, we have increasingly demanding environmental conditions. We also need new tools for silviculture if we want to preserve forests for future. And freestyle silviculture allows us to develop such tools. In the introduction, I will talk about why new silvicultural systems need to be developed, and present also a short definition of freestyle silviculture. Then I'll talk about the historical development of close to nature silvicultural systems in Slovenia, because freestyle silviculture is kind of meaningful upgrade of the older systems. This will be followed by presentation of basic principles, and also how we verify performance of this approach. This is important because some colleagues think that if this is freestyle, then you are allowed to do everything, but this is not the case. And then we will go through few practical examples, and in the end, we will highlight the most important aspects of the use of freestyle silviculture. Freestyle silviculture is a tool for developing silvicultural systems than a real silvicultural system like our selection system or clear-cut system. In general, silvicultural system means a program of treatments, including pre-commercial, commercial, during the whole life cycle of the stand. And this is designed to achieve specific management objectives and also sustainability of resources, forest resources. Why do we need to develop new silvicultural systems? There are quite some reasons. One is that we have a lot of artificial forest landscape, like this one on the left-hand side, result of centuries of collection of litter. Then we have even-age forests following disturbances. We have more and more severe disturbances in recent years. Further, there are certain limitations of selection system. For example, with deciduous trees, regarding also growth of broadleaf species. I will talk about this later. And then further, we have increasing complexity of managements, and there are also conflicts between functions. We had really a lot of people now during Corona time in the forests, and forest owners are not used to this. And some people come from urban areas, they are not used to behave in forest. And so we had conflicts. And moreover, we have significant and fast environmental change. And all this requires us to be innovative. And above all, it always was important and is to consider unique combinations of each site and stance. And freestyle silviculture allows adaptation of silvicultural system to each combination of stand and site, and also requirements of society. Just to give you one example, in the Alps, we have often emphasis on protection functions, and this requires different silviculture operations in otherwise comparable site and stand conditions. Let's talk about history for a while. The oldest close to nature silvicultural system in Slovenia is farmer selection, starting as early as in Renaissance several hundred years ago. And this was connected with river rafting and possibility to sell quality wood, large timber to cities and shipyards, like Trieste, for example. And this approach was upgraded with so-called control method for verifying its success by Schollmeyer at the end of 20th century. And then after the Second World War, clear-cut system was prohibited in Slovenia, and selection system with control method was introduced to the whole forest area of Slovenia. So after Switzerland, we were the second country in the world to totally prohibit clear-cut system. However, in early 1960s, selection system began to decline for several reasons. The individual education of deciduous trees often resulted in poor quality of timber. Some farmers continue diameter felling, so they will cut everything above 7 inch. This was kind of high grading of forest. And then at that time, we have relatively poorly developed forest infrastructure, skidding road system, and there was quite some damage during harvesting operations. And we started to have more and more of a browsing, and this is problem for silver fir, which is one of the most important species connected to selection forest. And we had also some power plants on coal and a lot of CO2 emissions at that time, and decline of silver fir also started of older trees. And what is also important at that time is that irregular shelterwood came to Slovenia, and this is really flexible system, and it soon became prevalent silvicultural system in Slovenia. And it looks like this. It means creating gaps or just slowly opening the forest for, let's say, more shade tolerant species, and later creating gaps. Basically, we are adapting the felling regime to ecological requirements of crop trees, to silvics of tree species. And irregular shelterwood creates kind of mosaic of smaller even age stands, which of these stands, all of these stands require then tending, like pre-commercial thinning and so on. And this system also maintains less microclimate and thus moves away from the selection principle. There are differences between selection system and irregular shelterwood. For example, spatial order is applied within irregular shelterwood with transportation limit. We have more pre-commercial thinning. Gaps are overall larger, and there are differences in verifying sustainability of trees. In selection system, we use, among other things, distribution of trees per DBH classes and this negative exponential curve, while in irregular shelterwood, we need developmental phases, as you can see from the right-hand side, and we develop a model and then we compare the condition with this model. But it's really difficult and inaccurate in uneven age stands to work with developmental phases. Therefore, our government required strict separation between selection system and irregular shelterwood. And this was not in line with natural development of the forest. Because of all these things, there was more and more desire to develop something overarching, kind of umbrella system, to take into account also favorable, let's say, features of selection principle, be careful with some limitations of selection principle regarding light demanding species, and also to be able to adapt to new challenges that I mentioned in the introduction. And in this way, freestyle system was kind of developed, and the freestyle silvicultural system combines basically the principles of selection with the irregular shelterwood, allows also maximum adaptation to the specifics of sites and stands. It's appropriate for application in demanding condition, for example, in case of unnatural planted forest or forest damaged by natural disturbances and so on. The system was presented and published by my predecessor, Professor Mlinšek, in 1968. But this was not pure Slovenian innovation, since this approach was already mentioned by Swiss silvicultural professor Engler in 1905. Let me read few words from his original paper, like the silviculturist should have as much freedom as possible to choose the cutting form. Then further, the more we are able to encourage different light condition within the stands and to control light according to our needs, the more we can refrain from working on large areas. And also later, the German silviculturists would call this freie Hypsführung, which means free selection of cutting. But still, Mlynšek was very enthusiastic about this system and also very consistent. So let's see some basic principles. Very important is to respect potential natural vegetation and natural processes, as for example, natural regeneration. Then we are also trying to mimic natural disturbance regimes as far as possible. But in the face of environmental change, this may be also problematic because recently the natural disturbance regimes are more intensive. Basically, nature is creating more and more disturbances by itself. Therefore, we should mimic more the low intensity disturbance, or let's say background mortality. And this is basically the selection principle. What is the guiding rule for freestyle silviculture? Working with as small gaps as possible to maintain the integrity of forest ecosystem and also desired quality of ecosystem functions, and also to work with the domestic species, so they are able to regenerate in quantity and quality that is our target. And we apply also some additional measures for nature conservation, like you see on this slide. And for example, like forest reserves, this is plant non-intervention. Then we have adapted management, like temporal or spatial limitation of management. For example, in Pahernik forest, where I'm involved in managing, we limit interventions during capercaillie bolts, so for rare and endangered species. And we have also special tending measures like remediation and creation of biotopes, wet areas. Here is one example of oak forest near Le Mans in France, managed by, let's say, continuous cover forestry, or it's near to selection. And we have a lot of beech predominant here in medium layer. So it will be very difficult with this system to maintain sessile oak. Therefore, here kind of combination with gaps, with releasing sessile oak in the regeneration is very important. And this goes toward, let's say, freestyle silviculture, but not really large gaps. And then the next example is from Croatia. And here we see also near Zagreb is this pedunculate oak, very nice regeneration, but this species is heliotropic. So that's why you don't see here, but I can explain you while I was in this site. So it's the quality is poor and it's also very unstable. So if you get some wet snow, you'll have problems here. So for stabilization, again, you need a bit larger gaps. So with the next step, kind of edge cutting and slight extension of the gaps. So this is kind of really flexible system. And with this system, we can also mimic natural disturbance regimes from small to large scale stand replacing. On the other hand, I have to stress here that imitation of natural disturbance is especially meant or targeting biodiversity. but we are often managing for many other functions, not only biodiversity. About performance verification. The control method is the basis for checking performance, and this means regular analysis of state of the forest through inventory and comparison with set management objectives. If we are not achieving our goals, this means adaptation, correction is needed. The basic principles are very similar to later developed adaptive management, which consist of adding research and experiment to the whole story of control method. And due to increasing complexity of forest management, I believe that the control method should be upgraded, let's say, with experiments and with research. But in addition to this verification, also silvicultural verification on site is important. For this, we follow the principle of forest standing, which requires that the situation in forest should be better than it was before silvicultural treatment. So better with every step. This seems rather theoretical or challenging, but in reality is not. For example, if you look at the slide on the left-hand side, you see this is kind of neglected after wind throw. No tending was done. We don't see any crop trees. Crop trees are not released. While on the right-hand side, you see a lot of possibility for crop trees. So mixed stand structure, and most of crop trees are released. So basically, it's not so difficult to evaluate what's going on in the field. And a good example of performance checking with management plans is also the process of adaptive participatory planning in Natura 2000 sites in Slovenia. We have here foresters, people from nature conservation, and other stakeholders are continuously involved in preparation of this plan. So it's kind of difficult process, but in the end, it's a good compromise. And freestyle silviculture is best illustrated with few selected examples of real forests. And there are 3 examples in this figure. We have here on the left-hand side conversion of, let's say, spruce plantation or kind of exotic species plantation. Then we have even age forest stands after replacing disturbance. And we have copies with standards in conversion to high forest. Another example from Pohorje, where we had a lot of spruce plantations for centuries, and this was damaged by snow 50 years ago. And idea was to underplant beech, and under this beech we have already the 3rd generation of forest coming. So I would say successful gradual conversion. Perhaps you heard about the Karst region of Slovenia above Trias. It was completely degraded, then replanted with black pine, and now it's converted. We are converting this towards broadleaves, again planting some oaks, and also example of this technique. Then combination of selection in mixed mountain forests with silver fir, combination of selection with irregular shelterwood. In parts with more silver fir, it's more like selection. In parts with beech, it's more like irregular shelterwood. And we have many fragmented private forests with small areas, low impact intervention. And this is also ideal for kind of selection principle and combination in gaps where we have more light demanding species. And then something special for Slovenia. This is almost a clear cut. So we have a very small area. This is a patch of black alder stands in lowlands in eastern part of Slovenia, where it's really difficult to have natural regeneration. So what we are doing is small or larger, finer fellings, and we plant black alder. Then in many of our urban forests, we apply freestyle silviculture because of the safety we have to manage here, and again, combination of selection in some parts, some gaps in other parts. So it's really, really different from site to site. And this is example how does it look like from the sky. So it's really patchy, as you see here. There are still some small plantations. There is some natural regeneration, but all in all, these stands are really small, and there is some selection in one part of the stand or one part of the property, and more, let's say, regular in the other parts. So really kind of variable approach. And now let me conclude. So freestyle silvicultural system is more a tool for developing new silvicultural systems. Freestyle silviculture is not a recent invention. It has quite some history, let's say perhaps 100 years. And there are approaches for verifying its performance. It's not totally free. On contrary, it's quite controlled. But our control method really needs upgrading with more experiments, with more science. So this is approach for the future, what we need. And also this principle of tending and checking for crop trees, this could be very useful for checking in the field. And I believe that freestyle silviculture is a good system for optimization of forest functions. And this is what we are really doing. It's not only about biodiversity. Biodiversity is very important, but it's only a part of the story. So there is recreation going on. We have direct protection functions. We have to produce wood for the owner and also wood processing industry. And at the moment, I believe there is too much stress in Europe on maximization, and the policy among sectors is not adjusted. So every sector would like to have maximum from the forest. So this is a bit critique from my side. And freestyle silviculture has this flexibility to have something special for each site and stand combination, and also socioeconomic conditions. And last but not least, we really have to kind of prepare forest also with this system, with planting, with experiments for the environmental change that we are facing. So thank you. This is all from my side.
Okay, thank you very much, Jurij. Thank you for sticking wonderfully to time. And a number of, at least one comment in the chat already saying how beautiful your forests are in Slovenia. They give us a lot to try and emulate. There are quite a few questions coming in. I'm going to start with one that Hebe, I hope I've got the name right, Karst was asking, which is in two parts. And the first I know is close to your heart, which is how do you keep browsing under control given such dense understory?
This is really important question, and I have to admit that we have problems with our browsing in Slovenia, but not because of the dense understory. This can be handled with special, let's say, hunting regimes, and also we can prepare such openings for hunting. But the problem are, sorry to say this, but the problem are hunters. Hunters are state in a state, and it's really difficult to negotiate. It's really tough to negotiate. And in the last years, the forest owners are more and more organized in Slovenia, and they are really pushing in the right direction. So I believe we will change this after many years. Hunting is organized by a state in Slovenia, and basically everyone could be a member of this hunting club or societies. And a lot of people are involved, and it's a political issue, so that a forest owner doesn't have much to decide about or talk about hunting. But because of the damage, they are really, the forest owners are stronger and stronger. And I see optimistic development.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. And the second one, also from Hebe, is more to do with the markets and the economic aspects of this type of management. The comment is made that our sawmills over here will resist taking larger dimension stroke higher value trees. So how does it work in relation to your markets and your processing sector?
So we have auctions, regular auctions going on for the highest quality, and for the highest quality, large diameter is no problem. So the larger diameter we have, the better it sells. But this is only, let's say, 1% of all the quantity. So all the rest is like ABC. And the conifers, they would have certain decrease of price in these medium qualities, but not so for the broadleaves. So broadleaves are always kind of in high demand with large diameters, and we have more and more broadleaves. And with these conifers, it's like this, that the first 4 meters are usually sold to a special sawmill with this bent saw, so that they can handle such parts, and the upper parts would go to these industrialized sawmills. So we have really high price at the moment, and I mean, people are quite satisfied with the income. And regarding the forest workers, they are skilled, and they don't require higher payment for working in selection forest, because they have still a lot of large diameter timber to harvest there. So they have their daily cubic meters. They are relatively fast finished with this if they have really large trees. So this is much easier compared to the first or second thinning. And in those forests, we have really low need for working with regeneration, pole stand, first thinning, second thinning. All this is done with basically more or less kind of selection harvest.
Okay, thank you. I should say to the audience, if you feel that I've not reflected a question properly, then please come back. And we'll try and explore the question in more detail. I've got a question about the gaps created like natural disturbances. To what extent do you consider the type of soil a limitation for freestyle silviculture?
I don't think there is any limitation because this is really kind of flexible system. We would say even clear cut could have a role in the freestyle silviculture. One example, in these karst plantations with black pine, we have gradual conversion going on where we have broadleaves coming in the let's say ground vegetation and the lower level. But there are some really low quality stands and with no mother trees of native vegetation. And what we would do is just, then we would harvest. It's almost a clear cut, but then we will also plant because it's no use if you don't have, if you have low quality, no regeneration with black pine and no mother trees, then you have to work in this way. So I believe that this can be applied also in boreal forest. For example, on Pokljuka, we have nice spruce forest at 1,400-500 meters, and we are applying this approach. But because larger disturbances are driving these forests, so we need to open up with gaps. So usually what we would start there is gap. So we would start regeneration with gap. We would never start regeneration with silver fir or beech in mountain area with gap. We would always start with slow openings and then release advanced regeneration and then releasing advanced regeneration. This is the approach in the mountain vegetation belt.
Okay, there's been a question which touched on something I was going to ask, which is, can you say some more about the methods for the inventory work and how you map the forest given the variation in species and age?
Yeah, so what we have is a network of permanent inventory plots. I guess similar what you have across whole Slovenia. And they are inventoried every 10 years. And in Paharnik property, we add some finance to have this network denser. So to have better data for our property. But we pay for this, so, but it's not so expensive. So we have very good data from the inventory. And then we have also forest stands, which are mapped by LIDAR or from aerial photos, and also with some addition with the field, from the field, so they are improved. And this is then kind of basic for 10 years planning. And with 10 years planning, we have then kind of maximum allowable cut, how much we are allowed to cut. And this is also approved by the state. If this is Natura plan, then also people from nature conservation are involved, and they would say, you are not allowed to harvest in elevation about, let's say, 1,300 meters from May, including the whole June, because of the forest hands and so on, as an example. And then with this, we have local forester. He's then according or following this plan, and he's then marking trees. But he's really free in his decisions. Sorry. So he just has to follow this, let's say, allowable cut. He's even allowed to go above or below per compartment, but on the management unit level, it should be then the number that is given by the state or approved by the state.
Okay, I've got a supplementary from John Norris to his original question, which is, how large are the permanent sample plots that are remeasured on this 10-year cycle?
I believe that's 3 and 5 are, so they are relatively small.
All right, okay, so 0.03 to 0.05 of a hectare, is that right? Or is,
no, R's.
R
is
0.3.
0.03 is 1 R and 0.05.
Right, okay. So then they're much the same as size as our plots.
Okay.
There was, right. Can we go back to the question? Can we go back to the harvesting and the economic side? I guess that, like in other areas where CCF is well developed, there's a system of semi-permanent racks for the machines and the machines generally stay on the racks while they're doing the harvesting and the extraction. Is that correct?
Yes, this is very, very important. And we are also trying to have the racks with bit larger distances. For example, optimal would be 20 meters, but we are trying to have them on 30 meters for mechanized harvesting. So we are felling the trees manually in between. And but still quite some part of Slovenia is done by manual and traditional, let's say with tractor. And for example, in Pahrnik property, we are still more or less with this technology. And it's steep slope, so we have built racks, and these are permanent racks. And when we will change technology, then because harvester goes perpendicular to the slope, so it's different system of approaching. And so we are not planning to change this because we still have offers, and we have very good forest workers. Offers for this type of, let's say, felling and skidding.
Okay. In your talk, you at some point you put up a slide showing pictures of silviculture linked to natural disturbance based regimes. To what extent do you believe this is possible, particularly at a time of climate change, when the disturbances are becoming both more frequent and often more intense?
Yeah, this is one important question, how to emulate natural disturbance regime, which is anyhow changing. And my more personal opinion is that we have to be careful and not to mimic too much on the larger side. So with freestyle silviculture, we have this approach of having gaps as small as possible to maintain the microclimate, which is again very important for many species, and also to help the organic cycling within soil, not to have too dry soils and so on. So I guess this is, at least for me, this is leading principle. And sometimes I hear this critique of the CCF approach, that we are excluding some species and so on, but we have to consider that nature is doing the intermediate and large-scale disturbances anyhow. And second, that these species often survive on special sites. For example, geomorphology in Slovenia is very diverse, and we have some areas where canopies almost never close because of the steep terrain, and there is always place for, let's say, pioneers and light demanding species. So it's something else is perhaps Canada, which is in part very flat. There this could be a problem, but we have really diverse geomorphology. So I don't believe that CCF is a problem. And I see European forests like a Swiss cheese. So they are very gappy already. They are far from being in the old growth conditions. So if I visited some old growth forests, so they are usually very closed, and so opening forests more and more, this is not our job, I believe. So that's why, but this is more, let's say, my idea, my feeling.
Okay. We've had a question about transformation, particularly under from even age to more irregular structures in more exposed positions, particularly possibly at higher elevations in the Julian Alps. And have you had problems in adapting or being able to transform old spruce plantations on these kind of sites?
Do you mean because of the disturbances, wind throws and so on, or?
I would guess that's part of the question.
Yeah. So we have a lot of change stands in northern part of Slovenia that were result of planting and favoring spruce for centuries. So we have third or fourth generation of spruce already. And this is a problem on, let's say, acidic soils. But in a way, the transformation, gradual conversion was developing quite successfully until the disturbances of the last decade. So this was also idea of our predecessors, not to go for direct conversion, but use the indirect conversion. And this was also economically successful, but we really have had kind of large scale wind throws in those areas coming in last 10 years. So this is really kind of special, and I guess we are behind in our conversion plan. For example, in Pahrnik property, we have still perhaps 20% of spruce stands with high growing stock, and they are really still closed in crown layer. And this is the part that is susceptible, could be to bark beetle or wind throw or combination. And this gives me worries. So this stands, but others that are structures, not so. So I guess we are lagging behind. So we should be faster in converting, but nobody knew what would happen in the last 10 years. So it's really, it's going much faster than we anticipated, this change.
Jurij, one thing I didn't quite understand in your reply, apologies. What was the difference between direct and indirect conversion?
Aha. So direct conversion for us is clear cutting, final felling, and planting. And then indirect conversion is more that we favor stable trees and then slowly introduce regeneration and then take care for the canopy trees that they remain for, let's say, 30, 40 years to give the shade and indirect education for regeneration. But we have also combination between these two types. So sometimes we would cut some small areas and plant, and on the stand nearby, we would just prepare kind of thinning for stabilization of stands. It's combination from patch to patch.
Oh, okay. I'll go on to another question, but Sergey, who asked the original question, please come back if you want us to explore that a bit more. I've got another question which takes us back to deer management and hunting. And I've been asked, could you expand, Jurij, on how the hunters affect stand silvicultural practices? Do the hunters actually want to clear the understory to make the hunting easier? And what are the forest owners doing to try and react to any problems that the hunters are causing?
So we can always help with silviculture system a little bit with introducing a bit more regeneration, but continuous cover forestry is about regeneration. So we already have a lot of food available. And if the density is something like, let's say, 2-3 red deers per 100 hectares, then we can do something with silviculture. But we have areas in Slovenia with 10-15 red deers per 100 hectare, and they're feeding animals in the forests. And so you cannot help with silviculture. So this is hunting is then a tool for silviculture, or hunting and silviculture should go along. And there are quite some examples from Slovenia and from other parts of Europe where they decreased the density, let's say 2-3 deers per 100 hectare, and beach was regenerating like flowers. So everything was going well. But for silver fir, a further decrease is needed. So up to, let's say, 1 red deer or few roe deers per hectare, per 100 hectare. And we've seen in Germany really successful regeneration and damaged forests after drought in 2003 by bark beetles. And because of this, let's say, hunting regime, they were really successful to replace spruce with silver fir and sessile oak. So very successful. These are some parts in Bavaria. So it's really important to see such areas, what success can be achieved. And also in Croatia, there are areas in Bosnia, but in Slovenia, we have only few spots where we have some poachers. And there is quite good situation with silver fir regeneration.
Okay, question come in, which takes us back to the transformation of spruce. It moves us away from Norway spruce to relatively faster growing spruce woodlands in UK and Ireland, where wind is a major factor. And to what extent can you see freestyle silviculture being used here, given the risks of opening up woodland or stands too much?
Opening of stands is connected to individual stability of trees. And with continuous cover, you have possibility to educate and favor really trees with a bit larger crowns that have also high vitality and good root system. And so overall, I guess there is slight less susceptibility to, or lower susceptibility to such stands compared to the even age stands. Because as long as the even age stands have really high collective stability in crowns, it's okay. But then if you open these short crowns, then you start having wind damage. But if you have nice crowns and nice root systems, and this, let's say, education for stability from the early stage on, this could be better. But again, so if the wind has a velocity of 150 kilometers per hour, then we cannot help with silviculture. But in, let's say, from 100 to 130 perhaps, is this gray zone where the silviculture matters a lot.
Okay. Can we go back to the inventory just for a second, just so that because I was puzzling about this. If you're a private owner, you get the results from the inventory applied to your woodlands or to your property, is that right? And yes. Do you also get, does the local forester essentially do the marking for you? Or how does that work?
Yes. Tree marking is free in Slovenia. So we have forest service, and you call the local forest ranger, and he would come, mark trees for you, everything above 10 centimeters. And with this, we have also a little bit of control about what's happening in the forest, and let's say much less stealing is going on because there is kind of control going on. And most of forest owners agree with this. I mean, they are satisfied, but there are always some that don't agree, that they would like do it on their own. And here they are basically, this is not possible. For example, for our forest, for Pahrnik property, it's about 600 hectares, something more. We would have to employ at least half of a forest ranger. And now the state is paying the forest ranger for our charity, our enterprise. So I'm quite satisfied that this is organized in this way.
Okay, and is there a possibility, and the information from the permanent sample plots is translated into a forest plan, which then forms the basis of the thinning? Is that how it works?
Yeah, yeah. And every owner can approach, can get this information through the web. There is application. He would write the number of his lot and he will get the data. But otherwise, also the local ranger could explain him, and so that this is freely available information.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions come in. If anyone has one final question, please type quickly. We'll just hang on for a second, but I'm aware that Jurij's operating on continental time, so it's later for him than it is for us. Right, there's one question about, again, to the marketing side. Have the larger commercial timber mills accepted and supported the freestyle approach? Or has there been any pressure to increase the volume of lower diameter products?
Not really. There is a little bit pressure to provide more wood for the sawmill industry. But the problem in Slovenia, or let's say organization, is such that we have almost 80% of private forests. And this depends a lot on the decision of each forest owner. And this is a little bit the problem, because the socioeconomic change is going on, and also in villages, 99% of people are urbanized, they work in cities, and we have perhaps one farmer in each village left, and they are a bit more skilled in forest operations, but this is a problem. So we need kind of program for activating forest management, and because without active forest management, we will be not able to adapt to environmental change. So this is important, but somehow our forestry policy is not really following this enough. This is again my opinion.
I suppose one question, supplementary question about, just for context, are the large mills in Slovenia, or are they that are taking your timber, or are you exporting your timber into Austria and neighboring countries?
We had quite developed wood processing industry before 90s, before independence, but then because of collapse of all the markets within Yugoslavia, within Eastern Bloc, this was problem. And so it was 10, 20 years of decline of wood processing industries of Slovenia, while at the same time our neighbors were developing wood processing industry. So now we are exporting quite some wood to Austria and Italy, perhaps broadleaves more to Italy, and conifers to Austria. Some colleagues are not satisfied, are very critical to this, but I always reply, we are really, really at the very high price because of the Austrian efficiency. We get very high, really high price for the wood, and slowly the industry is also developing in Slovenia. This will take some time. It's not so easy, but we are quite optimistic. So we are also using more and more wood for housing. And for example, I changed the windows from wooden ones to wooden ones in my house, and I got the subsidy for this. But if I would change to the PVC, I wouldn't got the subsidy. So I mean, there is quite some good development. So
Okay.
I'm optimistic.
Okay, thank you, Jurij, for that, for a wonderful presentation with some beautiful pictures of Slovenian forests. For people who've not been, I'll do my plug for Slovenia, as the ads used to say, as the green heart of Europe. Beautiful country with some lovely forests. Jurij, thank you very much for your time and for answering all our questions. On behalf of CCFG and our audience, thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And hope to see you in Slovenia.